We spend a lot of time looking at long-term energy use. There's so much publicity all of the time to global climate change and reducing emissions. Sometimes you think that fossil fuels are going to be completely out of fashion within 10 years. So there was an interesting presentation recently from Kinder Morgan and their Investor Day, and it has some useful macro slides there that we put together in this presentation for you. So over the long run, energy use is going to grow across all types of energy. And you can see on this chart here, while renewables are going to grow, natural gas will still be a far bigger portion of the world's energy use than renewables, even in 20 years' time. And you can see that pointed out there with the arrow on the chart. The issue here with global warming is in Asia. China and India are driving growth in emissions. And whatever people do in Western Europe or in North America or in other developed countries, China and India, because of the enormous amounts of coal that they consume, are going to continue to dominate whatever outcome we have on climate change. And you can see the numbers there. It's really quite staggering how much growth there is in coal demand in that part of the world. India especially is going to be the biggest source of new coal demand over the next 30 years. It's terrible. They have an argument that they want to raise living standards, that needs more energy, but they should be using a lot more natural gas. And look at how little natural gas they're planning to use in India over the next decades, even while coal demand is going to increase substantially. One of the interesting things about renewables is that they need natural gas because they're intermittent. It's not always sunny and windy. You can't rely on solar and wind all of the time. And of course, they do rely on batteries. But natural gas, because it's relatively easy to turn it on and off again, can act to be there for when renewables are not. And so you do see, and this is an example in this chart from Texas, you do see that natural gas use goes up when renewables are being used more in the system. And we think that's interesting. We're also going to be exporting more liquefied natural gas, or LNG. That's a very positive story. And even though natural gas prices are incredibly cheap today, and it seems like nobody can make money producing natural gas, that is going to continue to stimulate demand around the world. And the US is going to be an increasingly important exporter of natural gas. Another good story is that greenhouse gas emissions in America are falling. And they're falling because we're using more natural gas and less coal. And that is one of the most positive stories. People are critical of the US for pulling out of the Paris Accord on climate change. But when it comes to results, America is getting the best results of any country in terms of reducing emissions. And natural gas, not renewables, is the reason that that's happening, because we're using less and less coal. Another interesting thing is that although there's, like I said, enormous focus on renewables and climate change, there's lots of evidence that the typical citizen in the world really doesn't care, at least in terms of the actions that they're taking. And you can see that when you look at, for example, electric vehicle penetration. A little over 1% of cars sold around the world are electric vehicles. Look at SUVs though. SUVs are gaining market share dramatically. Look at the growth even in Europe, for example, up over 30% of new car sales. Another big example is air travel. People are flying more as living standards are rising around the world. And of course, airlines use a lot of fuel. And so that's another example of where there's an awful lot of lip service paid to climate change. But the facts are that the actions that people are taking every day in their everyday lives show that they're happy to worry about climate change. They don't really want to change how they run their lives. All of this means that we think that natural gas has a very positive long-term future, not just as a bridge fuel to a world of non-fossil fuels, but because it's the cleanest fossil fuel and has a fantastic opportunity to replace coal all around the world, but most especially in China and India, and make a big dent in carbon dioxide emissions. I'm Simon Lack. We invest in energy infrastructure.